Hello, my name is Diane Tobias, and today I'd like to illustrate how to rug hook with hand-dyed stretch velvet. Dyeing velvet has become my passion. I have a website called thevelvethook.com, and I invite you to visit that website and see what might be available. Also to look at the page on tips and the page on gallery to see some of the things that have been made by me and others with hand-dyed fabrics. Velvet comes in many fiber contents. You can have silk velvet, cotton velveteen, rayon nylon, but in my case I have found that stretch velvet is the best for rug hooking, also useful in rug braiding and applique. Advantages of stretch velvet include it does not fray or shred. So although you have to cut it with scissors or a rotary cutter, it won't tear. The advantages are that you don't get little hairs that might show on your hooking. It also is a little heavier than silk and rayon velvet, and so for rug hooking especially, it drapes beautifully, and you can get very nice loops that will complement your wool or other fabrics in a mixed media project. Common questions that I'm asked, number one, are how do you cut stretch velvet because it doesn't tear? I suggest you not use your hooking cutter as it might dull the blades. I have found it very easy to use a rotary cutter and a healing mat, or if you don't have that, scissors. So if you have a large piece of velvet, such as this, my velvet comes in 60-inch lengths. So if I were to rotary cut the whole 60 inches, it would be tedious and probably difficult for me to have a straight line for all 60 inches. So what I do is fold the velvet nap down, so right sides together, if you will. Try to even out the edge. Fold it, in my case, twice so that I have a length that is easy to handle on my healing mat, and that I can do like one pass with a rotary cutter. If you need to make a sharp edge to be a very sharp edge of your strip, do that first. In this case, I've already done that. And then measure over using the healing mat how wide to make your strip. That's the second common question I'm asked. How wide should the strips be? Although they can be narrower than a ½ inch, and I'll show you some examples later, and wider than a ½ inch, I think a ½ inch is a good place to start. So either measure from your healing mat or with a ruler a ½ inch, and then with pressure on your ruler, take your rotary cutter and exert some pressure all the way down, and sometimes you have to, with the scissors or the rotary cutter, finish the job, so to speak. But here we have a very straight 60-inch piece of stretch dyed velvet, which will hook quite a lot in your hooking. So then you take your hook, and just as you do with wool, you bring the loops up from the bottom. Now, velvet has a nap like corduroy, and so what I suggest is to look at one direction of the velvet and see if it has a sheen or is a more matte side. This looks more matte to me, and this side looks like it's got a bit more sheen. There's no right or wrong. Some people prefer a sheen, that's a unique characteristic of the velvet, and some prefer matte. What I suggest is that choose what you want, and at least with the one color, do it consistently. So just bring up the loop as you would with wool. You'll find, I think, that it's much easier to pull through your backing than wool is because of its stretchiness. Bring the loop up, it really as high as you want, within reason. And the higher you bring it up, the more drape you're going to get. Wiggle it around if you want. You can go directional, or in this case, I'm going to start a flower. Maybe one more loop over here. If the velvet turns, which I have not really found a problem with this stitch velvet, then just use your hook to get it back to the right side. And then cut off the beginning as you would. Sometimes if it shows a little bit more than you'd like, I can feather it like that. And the same with the end when you're done with either the item that you're hooking or the piece of velvet. Excuse me. The other fabric that I dye is hand-dyed taffeta. Taffeta is similar to silk and can give a very complementary or contrasting look to the velvet. It is shinier, and it can be hooked in kind of a knobby manner. So here we're going to hook some silver taffeta around the velvet. Unlike the velvet, you can tear this taffeta easily with scissors. Just cut down a ½ an inch or so into the strip and tear it. You'll find that there's 1 or 2 pesky strips of thread that usually are left after you tear it. And then again, just with your bent nose scissors, just cut off the head and the tail. And if you can't kind of cover them, then you can use your scissor tips to feather it. So there we have the beginnings of a flower. Add a little brown, a little green, whether it be wool, velvet, or taffeta, and you have a nice mixed media item. So here's a sampler that gives you an idea of how you can use different widths of the velvet. In this case, I used an 1/8 of an inch wide and a 1/4 of an inch wide, both of which could be useful if you were outlining, let's say, a fish or a flower or another animal. I've gone down even below an 1/8 of an inch, and especially with black, it can be very, very useful. The green here and the grays and the blacks are about a ½ an inch, maybe a little bit more. And in the case of the pink, that we're looking more at 1 inch. So I would use the pink more in a border. And I've done that very effectively. And I think you can see, compared to the very narrow cut velvet, when you cut it much wider, you get much more drape in your loops. Both are useful depending on what you're looking for. So I hope that this has been useful for you. A couple of projects to show you. Here is a mixed media pumpkin. Wool as the outline, wool strips with velvet in here. The knobbiness is taffeta, and some yarn from Iceland, some more velvet, and the stem is velvet. And in this case, a combination hooked and braided mat, which has been made with all hand-dyed fabric. So the pink center is braided and the very outer row is braided velvet. The next row is hooked blue velvet, and again at the end of that, right next to the end row of braided, is another hooked row of velvet. And then in the middle here with the blue, green, blue with pink, these are all hand hooked, hand dyed taffeta. So a good example of not only combining rug braiding and rug hooking, but also various mixed media fabrics. So again, I hope this has been useful to you. Please visit my website at thevelvethook.com. Thank you.